Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means it's time for the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last radio hour every week. Hillsdale Dialogue. You can find out everything about Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. You can find all of our prior Hillsdale Dialogues at Hugh for Hillsdale, including the first 12 parts we've done on Plato's Republic. And this week and next, we're going to do 2 more parts, and then in January, we're going to finish. But we are joined by President of Hillsdale College, Dr. Larry Arnn, and Professor of Political Theory at Hillsdale College, Dr. Daniel O'Toole. Dr. Daniel O'Toole, I have 2 questions to begin with you. The first is, what do you do with slow students like me? Because I have been wrestling with some of book 8, and my head hurts. Book 6 I got through, book 7, book 8 made my head hurt, and I just want, what do you do with slow students? I mean, they're trying, but they're not getting it.
Well, I don't know if you're a slow student, Hugh. You have to make the discussion relevant to the students by connecting the problems that are discussed to real political regimes and especially our own circumstances. And I think Book 8 is one that most of the students at the college really love to read and discuss, because it turns out the discussion of democracy run amok, of oligarchy, of factionalism, of the drones, the idle class, and of course of tyrants is extremely relevant to our political circumstances. And the students get that, and they see that.
All right, we'll come back. I had to look up democracy just to begin. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I still didn't know what democracy was. Dr. Arnn, you had a question for Professor O'Toole at the beginning of this. What was your question for him?
Well, I want to answer your question to him very briefly and say the best way to deal with slow students is to deny them admission.
Yeah. that's the real Socratic answer. I mean, at some level, you don't care about the slow students. Thank you.
But the answer is, what's that?
Didn't know I was allowed to answer that honestly.
Dan, I happen to know, sweated blood to figure out and be able to articulate Plato's forms, and you have not asked him. And it comes up in book 5. So now I think he should tell people, what in the world does that mean?
Thank you. Dr. O'Toole, what are Plato's forms?
Yeah. Well, here's my basic answer. I think that the forms are an articulation of 2 things. One, what normal traditional life teaches and what we all hope to be the case. And 2, what perfect knowledge would involve and entail. So on the first point, I would say that the forms are an articulation of the way in which we all normally think and are taught that there is an eternal, divine superstructure that transcends this world and that forms the standards for life in this world to look up to and try to live up to. And, the normal way in which that is presented, of course, is that the gods embody the perfect standards, or that the gods enforce the perfect standards. The gods are just, or the gods are justice itself, and so forth. So that's what traditional life looks up to. And it's what all of us intuit is the case, that there's some goodness or perfection that transcends this world that we're all striving for. Now, to get clear about life and how we should live means to think through, well, what are those standards in reality? I mean, you can ask, do they exist as such? But getting clear, first of all, means, okay, well, if I think virtue is the greatest good in life, then I have to articulate what genuine virtue is. And I can recognize that in a way, in the world of deeds, I may not be able to become perfectly virtuous, or I may not be able to become perfectly righteous or just, or my city or my community may not. But that's what we're striving after. And so being clear in the world means getting clear about that. And then the second thing that I would say, I think is a big point that Socrates stresses, is that perfect knowledge, what the philosopher or what the mind would want. The mind would want to be able to hold on to perfectly clear, unchanging, eternal objects. And you could say perfect clarity would be clarity about those things. Now, if those, ultimately, I think we don't just want knowledge of perfect things as such, but we would want to be able to explain the connection between the perfect and eternal and the world that we actually live in. So you could say understanding the character of our world would ultimately involve or entail understanding the clear elements, the eternal elements that underlie it and bring it into being. And the ultimate articulation of what that would look like would be articulating some kind of good or some underlying purpose or good cause. I would say a cosmic good that explains what the transcendent and eternal standards are and then how they underlie things in our world. Now, having said that,
Dr. Arnn, what do you think of that? I have my own big question for you, but what do you make of Dr. O'Toole's response to your question?
I'll just embellish a little bit. That was good. As to the first point, it's a practical fact in our lives that we always questioning ourselves. We do things and we think about them later and wonder if they were right, even after we do them and before we do them. So that means that we're longing all the time to justify ourselves. So that's, and it's very powerful, right? It's like I notice our dogs look guilty sometimes, but they don't say so.
There are lots of memes about this.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Now, as to the second point, it's also a practical fact that a lot of things we know are changeable and they're not as satisfying. And we have to know them. We have to watch them all the time. Almost every practical judgment is made on the basis of things that you only partly know and might change. And that's very unsatisfactory. Making practical choices, which is what we do most of the day. We're always questing for as much certainty as we can get. And that leads us up, actually. We got to go up. We got to, you think, like if you're trying to decide something hard decisions are the most interesting, of course. Somebody will always say some absolute thing that governs it, right? And that seldom works out.
Correct.
Take an obvious one. You shouldn't kill. In all circumstances, you shouldn't kill. It's easy to think of some where you should. And so the point is that too is unsatisfying. And satisfaction would come by having something durable, permanent, the best, eternal, the best. And we actually, for the same reason we question our actions under Dan's first category, we look for the ultimate under the second. And they're driven by the same thing, by our need to live and choose.
Now, I have a follow-up question for both of you. One is somewhat frivolous, one is serious. Dr. O'Toole, you just mentioned there are many memes about this. The term meme was unknown to Socrates. What is the relation of the memes that we all see, embrace, and laugh at to the forms that are underlying?
I'm not sure. I mean, you could say this. There are things that every sane, decent person can recognize are funny. I mean, in the same way that we can recognize archetypes of excellence, we can recognize archetypes of absurdity. So I see that connection.
That's what I thought. A lot of archetypes of absurdity make their way across the Hugh Hewitt Show. Don't go anywhere. Professors O'Toole and Dr. Arnn will be right back talking more on the Republic.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now. Or text the word Imprimis to 71844 and we'll send you a link to sign up for your free lifetime subscription. That's IMPRIMIS to 71844.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, Professor Daniel O'Toole, as we continue making our way through The Republic by Plato. Now, Dr. Arnn, this is tough. Way long ago, more than 50 years ago, when I first read this book, my teacher said there will be a break coming along in, I guess it was 1700 years later. He was talking about Machiavelli. What does he mean by the break? What is the break with this book?
Well, it's a change in the emphasis of philosophic inquiry, because, you know, once it's true that those two things that Dan said are practical facts that bear on our lives all the time, and lead, by the way, to wonder and the satisfaction of speculation about ultimate things. That's very great satisfaction, and it's connected to this practical problem we got, figuring out what to do. Well, what philosophy was to try to give an account of that, try to understand that down to the ground, try to reach and that's what this book might be, the greatest book ever written in this attempt, to try to give an account of all of that and describe what that ultimate thing is and how it relates to us. Because remember, in this book, he's saying all this and describing these forms, ultimately the ultimate form or idea of the good, and he's describing a society that will encourage the quest and protect the quest for that, right? So it's very practical and very theoretical, all mixed up.
Yeah.
So Machiavelli says famously, they spent their time looking for imaginary republics. Don't need them so much anymore, right? Because we should just focus on fixing this one, right? We should have a definition of virtue that is a citizen definition and that will make the city strong. And there are enormous problems with that work out in it's a solution to some problems. Machiavelli is a solution to some problems. The society
but an unsatisfactory
in which
one for people who like this book. Am I right? An unsatisfactory solution.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Machiavelli was exiled. His city was corrupt and acted awful. And, hey, look about you. Do you see any of that today? And we should stop all this speculating and get to work on it, right? And that is a solution of a kind. And the reason it won't work out ultimately is because this question of virtue is subject to doubt. And it's
Dr. O'Toole, that is the break. Is that just moving to the immediate?
Yeah.
But Dr. O'Toole,
that's exactly what I would say.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just wanted to build on some of the things that that Dr. Arnn said. I mean, yeah, one way of putting the break is that in the Enlightenment, and I think when one really thinks it through, Machiavelli is the origin of the Enlightenment. There really is an attempt to bring philosophy and political power together, which is the official aim, the official political aim of the Republic. But I think what you see in that work is that can't really happen. You can't enlighten the people, and you can't even really have what he calls in Book 7 a waking city where philosophy as such rules. But part of the reason for that difficulty is the end or purpose of the Republic is to make the people as virtuous and as rational as possible.
And I love having the dogs, by the way. Stay there. We're going to make you as virtuous and rational as possible. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, Dr. Larry Arnn, Professor Daniel O'Toole. They are my guests on this Hillsdale Dialogue where we're talking about The Republic by Plato. And we've gotten to the point where we're talking about the highest virtues that the regime can seek, that you might want to seek, Dr. O'Toole.
Machiavelli, I think, makes rational rule as he understands it possible by giving a lower conception of virtue, citizen virtue, that is, virtue that serves the normal ends of cities: wealth, security, freedom, empire, and things like that. And part of the reason he does that is I think he thinks, the things I just said about the forms, Machiavelli, I think, thinks that leads men to be outrageously otherworldly. The contemplative ideal means men don't deal with the harsh circumstances around them, and it makes them passive and easily preyed upon. And I think he thinks that the church in particular, the way it used and co-opted philosophy, made men neglect what they needed for their freedom and for their security. So a kind of liberation from that is what Machiavelli thought was necessary.
Now, Professor O'Toole, I want to stay in Book 7. We're jumping over Book 6, but we'll go back. If there's anything memorable that will endure, it is the cave, and it will be the myth of Ur. But the cave is at the start of Book 7. I think it may be the most powerful analogy in philosophy. You can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but Would you describe what it is? Yeah.
Well, so the cave, it's Socrates says that it's an image of our education and want of education. And what he means by that, I think, is that the cave shows what it is that normally forms us, what first initially educates us, but then also, in a way, miseducates us because it stamps views on us which are fundamentally inaccurate. So it leads to a kind of want of education as well. And then, of course, as the image proceeds, you see how it is that one escapes from the cave and what exactly that means. I think the best way to think about the cave is to grasp that it's an image above all of how authority shapes human beings. I think there's a lot of people kind of, I think, have misunderstood what the cave image means. They sort of enchanted by the promise of perfect knowledge that some of the other discussions lead out. People sort of think, well, I got to know the eternal, unchanging things, and the world of flux and sense perception is in some sense an unreal world. But I think what you come to see in the cave image is that what really misleads us, but the decisive shaper of our whole horizon, is political, moral, religious authority. That is the regime as a whole. And in the image that you see, you have men who are trained, trapped in a cave, looking at a wall, and they're looking at shadows on the wall, and the shadows are a projection from artifacts and statues that men above and behind them are projecting down. They have firelight behind them, so they can project these images on the cave wall. And I think when you start to think through, well, what does that mean exactly? And some of the details later in Book 7 make this clear. It means, above all, the images of the ideals of human excellence, of the just, the noble, the good, and the gods. And it's an image of the way in which the leaders of regimes, so you could say our political authorities, the media,
church,
those who are wealthy and powerful, the church. Yeah, I mean, it becomes not merely the present rulers, but in a sense, you could say the founders of regimes as well. I mean, the guys are holding up statues. They make something. So in Greek, making and poetry are the same thing. You could say the poets, so the political, theological founders of regimes as such are the men who stamp on us the images of what we think are most important, be it martial virtue or piety or freedom, equality, and so forth, wealth pursuit. And now, of course, these ends are not necessarily wrong or wholly wrong, but I think Socrates suggests what we're taught is a mixture, at the very least, of falsehood and truth. And we don't have knowledge truly of what the ends of human life are. And to have that kind of knowledge, one would need to be liberated, in a sense, broken free of one's view that simply looks at the images on the cave wall. And one would have to begin to ask the what is questions, inquire about what those things are, the statues, that is, the ideals of justice or human excellence and virtue and the gods, ask what they are. And a few human beings can be drugged through this process, drug out of the cave, kind of kicking and screaming. It's a wrenching process, and ask and interrogate those questions, and eventually come to live in the natural world, illuminated by the sun. That is, to come to see things as they naturally and truly are, and in particular, come to understand the human good and what it truly and genuine is.
But what I'll turn to Dr. Arnn, you have to go back down. All right, so the people get liberated from the cave where they are bound and looking at the wall. They go up. They like it in the sunshine. They don't want to go back down, but they got to go back down. Dr. Arnn, is that like the life of a college president at Hillsdale?
Yeah. Well, it's important to comment that the light source in the cave that casts these shadows is itself controlled by the artificial. It's people control it, right? And when you come out into the sun, it's much more satisfying because the sun is, the way we see everything in nature. In Harry Jaffe's great essay on Aristotle in History of Political Philosophy, early on he says, man is generated by man and the sun. And I swear I've spent 30 years thinking about what that might mean. And Plato is helpful in that regard, right? Because you see everything by the sun. There's nothing available to you except through the sun. If you lived in the dark, you wouldn't see. And sight is the highest sense, the most abstract of the senses. So the point is, when you go out, now real knowledge is possible for the first time. And this going out, by the way, is not for everybody. But it is also, however, inevitable because the images in the cave are unsatisfactory, unreal. Now, why go back? I think the answer to that is the same answer. Why would Plato write the Republic? Come to find out, you can judge a regime in classical political thought by whether it is friendly to philosophy or not, which is the highest human activity. We haven't talked about God much, but freedom of religion is a kind of a parallel to that, by the way. Different, but sort of operates in similar ways. If the state can't reach that, then the highest expression of human freedom is protected. And so you go back because you need the regime. To be a philosopher, you need friends. Can you have them in a despotism? The chilling, they're not in the Republic. The Republic flirts with this kind of control. But if you read in book 5 of Aristotle's Politics, toward the end of that book, in the last 3 chapters, he describes tyranny. And it's chilling, right? Because what is it at war with? Friendship, speculation, high ideals, any kind of privacy. And see, in other words, in such a regime, Plato couldn't write this book. And so you go back, first of all, a philosopher wants to know, and we all want to know. We have to know. And we all long to know. But few of us give ourselves to that, simply.
There's a movie in 2006 called The Lives of Others, and it's about the Stasi in East Germany. And the Stasi were everywhere, and they watched everything. It would be impossible to actually be a philosopher in East Germany, wouldn't it?
Well, that's what the movie is about, actually. It's Bill Buckley, before he died, called that the most powerful movie he'd ever seen.
Oh, I did not know that.
And oh yeah, and it's a very powerful movie. And in the same year came out another book about despotism, about Idi Amin, called The Last King of Scotland, which has brutality in it.
I did see that.
The Lives of Others is more gentle and yet more powerful, in my opinion, too, because you can't squelch these people. The lead character in The Lives of Others is a pair of actors, a man and a woman. They're lovers, and they're very artful in every way, but above all, they're artful in their compliance with the regime. They know how to work the system and get to act as they want. But then this rough bureaucrat, apparatchik, takes a fancy to the woman and wants the woman. And he's just got power. It is a wonderful undercutting of the claim of Marxism-Leninism, which, by the way, is just an attempt to take a complete account of everything and impose it by force, the thing that's flirted with in Plato's Republic.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Arnn and I, Dr. Larry Arnn of Hillsdale College, Professor Daniel O'Toole, also of Hillsdale. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All prior dialogues, especially in the series on Plato, are collected at hugh4hillsdale.com. We're talking about The Lives of Others, a movie from 20 years ago about East Germany and how it connects up with the Republic, Dr. Arnn.
It belies the truth of Marxism-Leninism, which is that your private impulses will be so completely eradicated that people can live together in perfect harmony and spontaneously. And this guy, and the action of the thing is this guy invading this relationship. And there's a tragedy. And the art of the thing is that there's this Stasi officer who's the most lethal. I can talk about this thing all day long. I used to talk to Bill Buckley about it at length. In the early going, he talks about the fact that how you interrogate. And you sit the person down, and you talk for hours, and they're sitting on a seat covered with a leather bottom. And when the interview is over, and all you got to do is just keep talking, because if their story is too consistent, that's a tell. And if the story is inconsistent, that's a tell. And he wears them down. And then when it's over, the seat is contrived so that you can take the leather bottom off and put it in a sealed jar for the dogs so they can track them later if they get away.
Huh.
So everything is thought through.
Yeah.
That is the Republic. I mean, at the end.
And this guy, now the Stasi officer, he overhears these conversations between these lovers and other friends who want to, be free, playwrights and stuff, who gather in this guy's house. And he is converted. He sees the wrong of his ways. In other words, the sun comes through to him.
Yeah.
And he saves them.
Huh. Well, that's a movie recommendation, but I want to finish this hour with Dr. O'Toole by asking a rather broad question. Chapter 6 is about what it takes to be a philosopher, and Chapter 7 is about what the philosophers do in the cave. Why does he do it in that order, Professor O'Toole? Why is Chapter 6 there before the cave? Because the cave makes so much easier to understand what he's about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think first he wants to describe the philosophic nature and its relationship to normal regimes and political communities, and the way in which the philosopher is normally at odds with any community. I mean, in one image in Book 6, he suggests that the philosopher is like a man hiding out in a storm. And the suggestion there is that philosophers they appear to be unjust or at least useless, precisely because political life is so chaotic and dominated by men who have rhetorical abilities and men who want to seek power. And political life is ultimately ruled in some sense by the unwise who can't recognize and make use of the wise. And so the philosopher is often useless and avoids getting involved in political life, which can ultimately harm or kill him. And so what the kind of regime that he might try to partake in is the regime that is suitable for his nature, as they say, that in which philosophy isn't alien. That is to say, the regime that doesn't try to stamp out real thought. I mean, you guys were just talking about tyranny, but one of the harsh points about the image of the cave is that every regime in some sense is a cave. That is, every single normal regime seeks to tyrannize thought in some fundamental way. But the question is there a regime ultimately that makes some kind of home for philosophy? And so I think so eventually Socrates has to describe why it is that philosophy and the regime are essentially at odds. That is the tension between philosophic questioning, which means questioning what the law and the regime teaches, and then also to sketch out the possibility of an education that a regime maybe could provide that could weave together philosophy and politics. So what you end up having is this sort of solution in which the philosophers get to ascend outside the cave and live in the Isles of the Blessed, that is, live in the light of rational clarity and consciousness, but also have some responsibility in guiding and guiding the regime and making sure that it's a regime that sustains the conditions that make philosophy and philosophic education possible. And so the philosopher,
We're going to pause there because that's the break for next week, and we will come back with Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 next week with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, Professor Daniel O'Toole. All of the Hillsdale Dialogues are collected at hillsdale.edu or at hughforhillsdale.com. Go there and get your application, especially if you're a youngster who thinks they want to understand this stuff at Hillsdale College. You'd be well advised to do that.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.